I'd done a television show or two with him, like in New York City, you know, like Colbert, where he had expanded the band a little bit. The main time I got to spend time with him was at the Station Inn. He decided he wanted to do his entire album front to back. And so I played pedal steel and some other things on that show. And because of that, when the Tree of Forgiveness came out, he decided to expand the band because he had been at that point just playing with Jason Wilbur and Dave Jakes for a long time, you know, many, many years. And there was bands before that. So he decided to go back. So Kenneth Blevins came in on drums and I came in playing a bunch of different instruments. The first rehearsal, it was when they expanded the band and we just ran down. I remember, like, a list. Jason Wilbur is the band leader, just all the songs, and you never know like what he's going to do. And it's such a huge catalog. You just have to kind of be ready for this, that, the other thing. And what instruments? I remember it was like what instruments, and it was like fiddle, mandolin, acoustic guitar, maybe some button accordion, pedal steel. And I remember in the beginning, or Jason was saying, well, we're not really sure about pedal steel, probably not that much pedal steel, but actually the pedal steel became actually like one of the main things I did because John really liked it, so it became one of the main things. I played more pedal steel probably than anything else. Started going out, doing some, went back to probably do in New York City shows, went to relatively early on, we did the Avett Brothers had a festival that they did in Cancun, I believe, and we went and did that, came back to New Orleans, played in New Orleans, and then we went out on the Kiamo cruise. So that's like in the early, first year. The band, I guess, expanding the band out and him being able to stretch out more, and it was the audiences were, reverent, audiences. People come to see. People have been following John for ever, and then folks who were like newer to him, generally younger, generationally. Yeah, but he's a very fascinating kind of. I always say like John Prine, touring with him and working with him and all that, and he has this sort of the way you think he would be is the way basically he was. Like your uncle, your beloved uncle. He's very kind of funny and laconic character. It's also like before going out on stage, like it would be I worked for years with Jack White, and those were like he's intense, getting ready to go on. It was just like it was almost like going into like a wrestling match or something. It was so intense in a good way. It was great, but the shows and then went from that to like John Prine. So before, like you'd be theater and you're waiting backstage and it's packed and all of that and the expectation. And, John kind of just would saunter out, Audrey, and goes, well, you ready? And we kind of go, yeah. And he goes, okay, let's go. And you kind of walk out on stage. You just said, that's about it. Yeah, I mean, one of the very early on, one of the first couple shows, we did a show, I think it was in maybe it was either Tennessee or Alabama, but we did a show. And at that point, because we were relatively close to Nashville, and which John would do is like, he didn't have a tour bus or anything like that. It would be like he'd rent cars or he'd drive one of his cars, or, people would have to, because it was close to Nashville. Like he had one of his cars, like a, kind of a Lincoln type car or something. And we were shuffling around. So somebody we're going now to play in Memphis. So, and it was just a couple hours drive. And Fiona goes, well, somebody has to go with John and something like that. He goes, Fats, why don't you drive with John? Because there are other guys I forget what it was. So, okay. So, and I had just started working with him. So we get in there and John goes, well, I'll drive for a little while. And then if you want to drive, you can drive. And he liked to drive. And so we kind of get in the car and just driving to Memphis with John Prine. And it's just not but it was just sort of like, and he just sort of, we were listening to some music, and he'd make little comments about like a sign or this, or, just gentle stuff, funny observations. Like something would amuse him as he's driving, like a sign, and he'd talk about it. But I just thought, I know it's not any earth shaking, but I was just going to Memphis with John Prine. Yes. Yeah. Another just antidotally, but that John, like, when traveling, there's certain things he always traveled with. And in the morning, one of the things is like, and Jason would have to get it. When he got into the car to drive to the next gig or airport, whatever, he had to have a hard copy of the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. And the two newspapers were in the car. And then he would, a lot of times in the morning, he'd flip open, and he'd just read the newspaper.
That's exactly what Billy Bragg would do every single day. He would have two newspapers and read those on the way to the gig, front to back, and comment on.
Yeah, that's fine. It's very interesting. Yeah, but it's interesting. Like, it's very, very old school, but in a really good way. Like, there's nothing the matter with it. It's like, he was not big on looking at things on his phone. Yeah. So he would do that. That and Archie comics. He always had to have his Archie comics, the newest Archie comics.
I didn't even know they were still making Archie comics.
I was surprised too, because I remember them from my youth. But it's some reason it was just a thing. He had it. He wanted his Archie the latest Archie comic. Well, John, when he traveled, also one of his favorite places was Dairy Queen, and I think maybe in my life I had been into a Dairy Queen once, Not because I wouldn't think to go into a Dairy Queen. It just is not exactly but John really liked Dairy Queen. And it was very regular stops. So the first time I'm traveling it was probably Dave, Jason, and myself, and I can't remember, but some combination of that. But Fiona was also in the car. And we're driving along, and he wants to stop at Dairy Queen. So we pull into Dairy Queen. I go, okay, Dairy Queen. And this is in the early beginnings of touring with him. And we get out of the car, and I go to Fiona. I go, oh, Dairy Queen. So what's good here? And Fiona goes, nothing. And she walks into she walks in with John. That's one of my favorite road quotes.
What did John like at Dairy Queen?
Oh, he'd always get the same. He'd have he'd have his cheeseburger and fries and usually and some kind of shake or something, which Fiona didn't think highly of. But yeah,
wasn't the healthiest thing.
No.
Did you get to go to any meet and threes with him?
Yeah, not like curiously enough, not Arnold's. Because did we go? We probably, I'm sure, one or two on the road, somewhere where you could get that, which is one of his favorite things. Of course, we know that. And he would also always travel with his newspapers. He'd always travel. He had a little bag, and in the bag would be packets, but of French's yellow mustard and ketchup, and one or two other things, just like very bait, but just like he liked things that were very like that, like meatloaf or like French's mustard, or yeah. And if he couldn't, if somebody didn't have it, then he could just pull it out of his bag. Yeah, I mean, I think he was very thankful for audiences of people who really loved his writing, and he connected with people. He would meet people afterward, and if people came up to him on the street or something like that, he was always, super kind and self-effacing, and when he was talking to people, even if he was in a hurry or something or had to get somewhere, he knew. It was John Prine and Bill Murray being interviewed by Cooper, Peter Cooper. By Peter Cooper. And it was right around, I think also had to do with the album coming out, if I'm not mistaken. But I went to it, and it was one of the best, those two guys, Bill Murray and John Prine, and being interviewed by Peter. And they were talking about different things, but also John was talking about, as was Bill Murray, was talking about how one of the quotes with John was said was that, you have to be good. And he goes, but you have to be lucky. And he goes, and I was pretty good at what I was doing. He goes, but I was also very lucky. And Bill Murray said the same thing. He was saying that, from being in Chicago, and he was saying, like, if I, playing into clubs, and if Chris Christopherson hadn't walked in and this and that, and people hadn't, if this hadn't happened to this, who knows what would have happened. But it happened that way. And Bill Murray was saying the same thing, about how Saturday Night Live is in infancy, and people they started calling people from the old Chicago days to go, and he goes, and he went, and his brother was involved. He goes, and if that hadn't happened, I don't know what would have happened, Like Belushi, I think, went ahead, and then they were talking about this thing, Saturday Night Live or something, and so he said, well, I know some people in Chicago. I guess John knew where he came from and being fortunate, but also being really good. But of course his writing and all of that, it's like a classic example of a lot of John Prine's, as we know, like his writing is deceptively simple. It seems like, oh, I could write that. It's not anything, particular. But then if you sort of look at it and dissect it, it's going like, wow, that is like the certain word usage or it's very hard to do something that good and appear as if it's tossed off.
I've said for years, I think Paradise is one of the great environmental anthems ever written. But nobody thinks of it that way.
Yeah.
And it's a testament to how great it is. It's not it doesn't hit you over the head with
right.
You should feel this way about it. You just simply accept it as this piece of our folk language.
Yeah. It becomes sort of an instant classic in that sense, but it's deeper than you think. Like a lot of his stuff is deeper than you'd think. Though those of us who love John Prine and his writing know, but if you look at it, I'm trying to equate it to art, like where there's something that's very, it could be like abstract painting or something that seems like, well, that's just, a couple lines and a blah, blah, blah on a piece of canvas. And you start looking at it and you realize, no, this is hard to be simple. It's hard. You have to really distill. You have to distill stuff. That John could play those great theaters like the Orpheums and those mid-sized theaters sold out. To be able just to do that, it's like you're not playing. And we played some large festivals and stuff like that, but to be able to just do that is like, and know you can do it all the time. It's like perfect.
It's the perfect career.
It is the perfect career.
You can go to the restaurant and nobody knows who you are usually too.
Yeah. It's like a perfect thing. I mean, shows, I remember playing at, we went down and played in Florida, it was the A2A festival. And right before we went out, it was raining, and so we went out and we did the show like in the rain, and everybody was there, and it was a kind of I remember it was like a cold rain, but John went out and we just did the show in the rain, and went back to the hotel, and then shortly afterward, I got the call from Mary Sack that David Olney had passed away on stage.
Oh, man.
Yeah, at that festival. So that sort of stands out of my mind. Yeah. John had not played in Paris, and in all of, and he wanted to play in Paris. So we had played in Oslo, think in Oslo, yeah. And we went to he wanted to play in Paris, and the tour manager and powers that be are saying, well, it's not going to make any sense because you've got to go there because of the logistically, you have to be there for a couple of days. You're just going to play like a kind of a rock club, kind of black room place, large, but, and it's financially not going to make any sense. And John was going, he goes, I want to play Paris. If I can play Paris, I want to play Paris. And finally went, okay, we'll play Paris. So we went to Paris and we had a couple days in Paris, and I met friends and went around in Paris and had a good time. Finally played the show. It was a great show. After the show, we had cut John was in a lot of pain from his hip and all that. He had to have a emergency hip replacement. I believe that's correct. So we went back to Nashville, and that was the last show he ever played. And he got to play Paris.
How did you hear about his passing?
From Fiona and everybody. We knew he was in the hospital, and he had bounced back so many other times from serious cancer, and we were right with that and COVID and everything that was coming down. I mean, as I was talking with you earlier, like in 2020, that's all. And the Paris thing, of course, is 2020. It's like February, March, And then John goes into the hospital. The tornado comes through Nashville and hits our neighborhood, tears it up. COVID comes down, and everything is just. And we were just saying, if John can pull this, like, to ourselves, but John can pull this out. Like, if he can, he can do it. He's tough as nails, and he is tough as nails. But no, it was just the infancy of COVID. Nobody knew anything about it, what it was. He was like, I think he was only the second or third person to die in Nashville of complications from COVID. Yeah.